welcome to episode 2 of The Filler. This week's subject, personal favorite of mine, Captain America. Not really. But I'm not going to really go into who's my favorite superhero, because, I don't want to have to deal with the whole fanboyism of, oh, this character's better than that character, or this character could kick this character's ass. Because, I really could care less, so. But I digress. Back to Captain America, the subject of this video. So our question today comes from my brother, and it is, how was Captain America be able to be frozen and unfrozen and still be the person he is, like without any physical damage or mental damage or anything like that? This is actually a really simple explanation for the MCU version, which is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, all the movies and that stuff. Unlike most of the comic books and cartoon versions of when Captain America is frozen, has some sort of accident happen, falls into water, and then they comedically show him in a block of ice. But you'll notice for the MCU version, they don't ever do that. The only time they show him frozen is actually only a quick second in a flashback. Now here's some important things to note. When Captain America gets frozen, number one, he's in a ship, which is basically just a giant shell of metal around him now. It's important to note that when he crashes, he's not wearing the best safety equipment on the planet. And also you'll notice when they find his body in the ship later, there's a crack on the windshield. Now the thing about this is due to the fact that he's still in that giant ship, so snow and water and moisture can still get in. He's never underwater. He's always in the ship. Now this helps him in one of two ways. One, it keeps his body in a warm-like structure because are cold, you put a tinfoil sheet around you, warmth, and bounce it back to you. And two, this also helps him for the freezer effect. If you take an ice tray and fill it full of water and put it in your freezer, of course, the water will turn into ice. But if you leave the ice in the tray just long enough, the ice will begin to shrink. This is known as sublimation. It's the act where water becomes so frozen that it turns into a gas and disperses into the air. Now this typically only happens when you freeze water. Anything beyond the frozen temperature will typically turn it into a gas afterwards. Now the reason this helps out Cap is because even if water, snow, or any sort of moisture gets onto Captain and ends up freezing him, like we saw, the core body temperature he has for his body will manage to actually heat the ice. Because essentially, at this point, he is now just in a medically induced coma. Of course, it's not medically induced. He got his brains knocked. Now, most of you already know that Captain America took the super soldier serum. Now, what that did is it basically altered his body's molecular structure. One of the side effects is he can no longer get drunk like the normal people around him. Now, you'll notice this actually happens in the first movie when he comes back and tries to get completely plastered, and he gets angry because he can't. Now, the reason this part is important is because you're led to believe that his genes degrade at a slower rate. This helps him out because normally, if you're stuck in frozen ice, normally you would get frostbite in this kind of snow. But you'll notice he actually doesn't. But he does start to. Now, you'll notice in this flashback that there's a lot of skin degradation on his chin and over some of his eye area. This implies that his skin was just now beginning to deteriorate to frostbite standards. This also means that it's highly likely that when he was frozen, his heart was slowly beating. So the thing is when you get cold, your heart tends to slow down, and the beat of your heart goes slower and slower till you go into catatonic state and your heart stops and you die. Luckily, due to his super soldier serum, we're led to believe that his heart rate keeps going throughout the entire situation. Now, it isn't to say that this is 100% the reason why when he was frozen, unfrozen, he was perfectly fine. Although, it should be mentioned, there have been articles documented of a person falling into water, completely freezing to death, dying, and then later being brought back. An article of note is a 14-year-old St. Charles boy who fell through a frozen lake and ended up under it for 15 minutes and was pronounced dead, according to doctors, for a total of 45 minutes before coming back to life. Now, it is important to note that while the doctors use CPR, S.H.I.E.L.D. probably has a little more advanced technology. I mean, we did see Captain America on highly unusual table when he was rescued. And obviously, if you watch the S.H.I.E.L.D. show, you know about the Tahiti Project and how advanced S.H.I.E.L.D. has in some of their medical processes. But the important thing to note of here is how his brain survived normally. Now, the thing is, it may not have. We see a lot more flashbacks with the older, newer stuff than we ever did with the original Captain America stuff. We also note that when he ends up having to see an image cast in his brain by the Scarlet Witch, it's not quite up to normal standards. I mean, it was kind of dark. So that's not to say that his brain wasn't completely altered by this situation. So once again, let's go over this. Captain America was frozen. He was frozen in a condition where it was the freezer-like effect. Therefore, the freezer effect made it so all the ice dissipated off of him, so he wasn't completely frozen. Now it's safe to say he was probably in a coma because of some sort of damage from flying around the ship. And obviously we can tell he flew around the ship due to the fact that he was no longer in the seat he was when he crashed. This leads us to believe that he was knocked out, put into a coma, and then slowly started to freeze. And since he didn't completely freeze, his brain was still going and his heart was still going. And given that we know people can wake up from comas up to like 80 years later, although very rarely, it's safe to say that Captain America just did this. So there you go. That's this week's episode of The Filler. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below on what you think the next episode should be. I'd really love to hear from you and see if you have an idea of what question you have about the MCU, DC Universe, really anything in general. Doesn't have to be comic books. It can be movies. It could be whatever you want. So, yeah. Captain America. God, I hate him. He knows what he did.